Yeah, and the support of Western countries has been really crucial in the gains Ukraine has made on the battlefield, particularly over the last couple of months. I mean, the HIMARS rocket systems from the U.S. in particular have really kind of changed the tide. Um, but there is a sense that Ukraine needs continued support from the West if they're going to keep making gains in this war. France and Germany, both in the wake of the missile attacks the last couple of days, pledged to send air defense systems here. But of course, there's concern about whether they will continue to send arms and how long they might do that.
Um, on Monday, when we spoke on Monday, actually, when there'd been those missile attacks across all the cities, and there was a feeling that could have been the start of a big thing, a big offensive, in revenge attack for the attack on Kerch Bridge, and also Putin recognizing that some parts of the country they weren't doing very well militarily, and therefore rocket attacks was the sort of the Syrian approach, the idea of bombing a nation to destruction. That hasn't followed necessarily, though there have been further attacks in Zaporizhzhia, for example. Is there a sense that Russia only has a very limited amount of firepower that it has to use sparingly, or do you feel there might be some more attacks coming?
That's definitely one of the questions that we're trying to get a sense of this week. I mean, they fired more than 80 missiles on Monday across the country, which is by far the most, at least since the early days of the war. And I think there was a lot of fear that we could see a similar thing yesterday. They fired a dozen or so missiles yesterday, and only a couple of those got through the air defense systems. And this morning in Kyiv, there have been air raid sirens on and off basically the whole morning. And so it's not clear that this wave of attacks is over, but so far, Russia hasn't shown that they have enough missiles to just keep doing what they did on Monday every day.
And what's the mood like in Kyiv this morning?
This morning it's pretty quiet. As I said, there've been air raid sirens on and off all morning. It was quite quiet yesterday morning as well, partly because the authorities here asked people to reduce their electricity use so they could fix the electric grid. The electric grid, I think, is now back up and functioning pretty normally. And by yesterday afternoon and evening, people were out and about. Not like normal exactly, but in pretty strong numbers. There was a vigil at the children's playground, which was the site of one of the missile attacks on Monday. Bars and restaurants, just a few feet from there were open. And so there was a real sense among residents that they were not going to sort of live in fear. They were going to go out and live normally as much as they could.
And how full is Kyiv now? Because there was obviously we remember the great outflow of people at the beginning of the war. Then there were stories of people coming back. What's your sense of how many people are in the city? How many people have said, no, we're going to stay away for the several years it will take for this war to conclude? Or are people now largely, it's back to normal with the threat of air raids, of course, but there's still plenty of people around?
I mean, I was never in Kyiv before the war started, so I can't give you a comparison. I know there are still hundreds of thousands of people who have left the city and in many cases left the country, but it feels to me at this point, at least before Monday, it felt quite normal. The streets are full, there's traffic, restaurants and bars are full. They close a little earlier than they would have before, but it feels like a normal European capital city for the most part.
And do you think people will leave now? Has there been much talk of that?
No, I really don't think they will. I went out and talked to a number of people on Monday after those missile attacks, and there was much more a sense that they were not going to be frightened and that they had withstood the worst that Russia could offer in the first weeks of the war, and they were determined to show that they couldn't be forced to surrender with these random attacks on civilians.
Just finally, one of the things we've talked about quite a lot in this program, and I know a lot of Ukrainians have said this, this sort of fear of war fatigue. Particularly among the West. I wonder whether in some respects the attacks on Monday, awful though they were, and obviously if you experienced the personal tragedy, this is no consolation whatsoever, but it slightly reminded the world of the war again. Maybe it slightly reminded the world of the capriciousness of Putin, his ability to kill innocent civilians. And I wonder whether in the medium term that might be seen by Ukrainians as a good thing, that to remind the world this war's not over.
I certainly haven't heard any Ukrainians saying that they thought this was a good thing. I mean, there was again the pledge of air defense systems from France and Germany, which is another boost for them. And it is true that anything that's a reminder to civilians in the West that the war is still going on and the Ukrainians continue to need financial and military support could be helpful for them. Mostly what I saw here was just anger at Putin and at Russia in response to what happened, that they felt like these missiles were hitting all over the country. They were hitting almost exclusively civilian sites. And frankly, we're very lucky that only 19 so far civilians have died as a result of that, because it could have been far, far more. But really, anger was the major response I saw here.